entry-level scientists. Great opportunities. This is probably the role that's most similar to what you would see in a university setting, in a basic research setting. So at SIVA, this might be, so SIVA is an animal health company. They develop vaccines for use in poultry. And they then basically to prevent different avian illnesses. So this might be somebody working in a lab to identify a new epitope that they could use for a new vaccine against perhaps avian influenza, right? The next is, process and manufacturing engineers. So what the scientists in the R&D facility do, they might identify, let's say, a new vaccine. So you basically make that vaccine in a small scale in the laboratory first. Once you show that it works, then you're going to want to scale up to a slightly larger, a pilot study. And then from there, as long as it's continuing to work and you've transitioned it to that pilot study effectively, then you're going to want to scale up to manufacturing quantities, right? So these quantities where you can manufacture a huge amount of it. So the process engineers are really focused on helping take that process that you've started in a small scale in the lab all the way up to manufacturing levels, right? So they're working throughout to make sure that the product you're generating in that small scale is the same product that you're generating in that manufacturing quantity. And I think that probably covers the example for SIVA, right? They might develop something in a small quantity in the lab, but then as they're manufacturing for distribution across the world, they need to be manufacturing much larger quantities. So QA and QC, you hear these words used a lot. To be honest, when I took this role, I had no idea what they were or what the difference was between the two. So quality assurance is really focused on that process of manufacturing. So it's process oriented. So you're looking at that you're assuring that the quality is going to be there. And if it's not a result of a breakdown in the process of manufacturing it. And so these are SOPs, there's a lot of paperwork, documentation as that product is manufactured. QC is more product oriented, so you generate, say, a vaccine at SIVA, and then you're going to want to make sure that it actually works, right? And so you might take a small amount of it and do a test. You might check it to make sure it has everything in it that you expect to have in it, and make sure it also doesn't have anything that you didn't expect to have in it. Formulations. So these are the scientists, I think, these are the chemists and scientists that are determining what is in a finished product, right? And so there's different effects that you can have from putting in. So for a vaccine, it might be the adjuvant that you use to elicit the largest immune response. Or it could also just be, for a tablet, it might be the flavoring that you use. It might be how you make that into a tablet. And then regulatory affairs. I mentioned that most of these settings, most of these positions are regulated. They're going to be governed by FDA or USDA or EPA, depending on what you're generating. And so that's a key role at almost all of our companies. And then I would stress this too. So non-science roles. So if you have a scientific background, and I've already talked to a couple people around, if you have a scientific background, I think that it gives you a different perspective on a lot of these things. So I put up a few example roles here, so marketing and sales. So if you have a technical background, you've worked with a product before in a lab, you're going to be able to easily explain how the customer is going to benefit from using this product. Or you're going to be able to explain the complex science behind that and break it down for somebody who might just be a layperson. It might just be in procurement. Technical support, the same thing. If you use this or have a scientific understanding of the product and there's somebody's calling you and you can tell them and walk them through that, I think there's a unique advantage there. And then I also believe there's a huge advantage for scientists and technical backgrounds in entrepreneurship. And I think it's very data-driven, and I think you can use that data-driven process to really help guide you in a startup setting. So I wanted to throw this up there because I think it's kind of interesting. I actually gave a slight variation of this talk yesterday to a class at KU Edwards, and I didn't have this data in there. And this was the piece where they asked the most questions about, like how much, what can I expect to make with an associate's degree versus a bachelor's level. This is general. This is I would say industry averages. So don't hold me to this. But typically entry-level technicians, which is I would say the most sought-after position, and our members, the one that they have the hardest time finding, the hardest time filling and maintaining. is going to start somewhere around $16 to $18 an hour. It's an hourly position. You get overtime, so some people like that. But typically 35-ish, 35,000 a year, something like that. Obviously, it goes up with a master's level education into the 50s and 60s, and then higher with PhD. And then I did want to include this. This is, I forgot to cite my source, which is, as a scientist, I feel a little bit ashamed. But I did want to highlight a few. This is from a MARC study, so the Mid-America Regional Council does a lot of workforce development. I found some of this data kind of buried in there for very specific chemistry-based positions. So you can see chemists, the average bachelor's level salary, 68, certainly higher than what I talked about, but might be skewed perhaps by the number of older, I was just going to say older scientists, experienced scientists. But you can see even a technician level starting out at a $41,000 average salary. That's a really incredible salary. I think relatively speaking, STEM really offers a lot of opportunity to work in a very, rewarding profession, but also a very lucrative profession as well. These are some numbers too from a national bio study, but you can see this is average wage. If you compare the average wage in STEM versus non-STEM, it's something like 66 to 43. So there is a really lucrative benefit to working in STEM. So who are these employers that are employing the scientists? I tried to include a pretty diverse cross-section here. There's obviously many more than this. I just want to hit on a couple things. There's a few clusters in this area that are very large employers of scientists. So has anyone here heard of the Animal Health Corridor? Anyone? Couple? So between Columbia, Missouri and Manhattan, Kansas is the largest concentration of animal health companies in the world. So if you think about that, I mean, you think, oh yeah, that's pretty large, but in the world, so something like 56% of all revenues generated worldwide in animal health, and animal health is pretty broad, pharma, food, nutrition, a few different things, are originating at companies that have facilities between Columbia, Missouri, and in Manhattan, Kansas, up to St. Joe, and then I'd say down to Emporia/Wichita. So there's a huge number of these companies, Behringer, Bayer, I mentioned a few, SIVA. So there's a huge opportunity in animal health locally. And then I also want to point out contract research. So we also have a very large cluster of contract research organizations. These are groups that are helping those pharmaceutical companies get their product from concept out to the market to be able to be applied and treat patients or animals. And then I also just want to point this out. So there's a huge number of early stage companies, 50 employees and under, 20, maybe even 25 employees and under, but we see a huge amount of job growth, job opportunity and job growth at these companies. And so I've highlighted a few here that we work with, there's many more. And so I wouldn't just focus on the large, but importantly, you're not going to find a lot of those positions on jobs boards. You're going to find those positions from networking and connecting with people. Slightly over time. Breeze through this. So how do you connect with those job opportunities? ACS is great. I think there's great industry representation here, and I think the key really behind everything I'm putting up here is networking, right? And so Maria mentioned it. Whether you're starting a company or whether you're looking for a job, networking is absolutely critical. It's the reason I'm in my role today. The first position was kind of luck. The first job I got was kind of luck. Every job I've had since then has come from somebody that I've known and a connection that I was able to leverage into that next role. So I'll give just a short pitch for us. We have launched a career center. We're working with a lot of those companies that I posted up there, and so that's a great opportunity. We also just hired a KU graduate. She's not quite graduated yet, but she's on full time. Alex Irwin. She's going to focus on workforce development and STEM education. And then I put a few other groups that we work with locally. Kansas City Area Life Sciences, Animal Health Corridor, and Missouri also has a bio affiliate that we work pretty closely with. And then my contact information's there, and both Gary and Michelle know how to get in touch with me, so I'd be happy to help make any connections possible. So thanks so much.
Okay, I'm sorry for the lull there. Thank you very much, Mr. Ridenour, and I said your name wrong, apologize. Our third and final presentation is Dr. Gary Clapp, Associate Professor of Chemistry at MWSU, He's going to tell us about pharmaceutical drug development, why it costs $1 billion. Let's give him a warm welcome.
I'm not sure how to follow up with that. Those of you who know me already know I preach a little bit about network. This is an hour-long talk that we'll do in about 10 minutes. So I think it was recently in the news there was a young man who was found guilty of probably extorting people for the cost of their pharmaceutical, and at first I thought, wow, that's really terrible that he raised the price through 278% on a pharmaceutical formulation. And I thought to myself, I teach this. I've worked in the field for 20 some years. I have a whole hour lecture I could do on it, but I don't think that's what I want to concentrate on. I think I started this talk back when I worked with my friend Michelle at Kansas City Analytical Services, and at the time it was 400 million. You can see I've aged quite a bit, so has my slideshow. It went from 400 to 600 to 800 million, and then it went to 1.3 billion, and I think the latest one is like 3 billion to bring a drug all the way to market. Is that about right, Bill?
Yes.
So it's about, I think the latest one is now about $3 billion to actually start your process and bring that forward. And I had no idea that cost would be like that, especially when I entered this field, because in high school I didn't know what I wanted to do. Many of you are in high school, I understand, and are heading off to university soon or to college to further your education. My education ended up starting out in construction. So maybe that's the reason I have steel knees today, because I was a 25-year-old freshman. It took me 7 years to figure out what I wanted to do. I went to technical school, I went to the School of Hard Knocks, I played softball, I ran around, I did a lot of things to enjoy myself, but I found them eventually unrewarding. And right now we're not in a time where interest rates are much of a problem, but in about 1979 interest rates hit 19%. So there wasn't a lot of growth going on at the time. And I thought, what a great idea to change careers, to look for something else. So I went back to school. And I'd always loved chemistry. I love chemistry and how chemistry matches with mathematics, because they two run together. So I went through the chemistry program, and I